Have you ever stopped to think about what's really driving your choices? In this explainer, we're going to pull back the curtain on the invisible psychological rules that secretly run our lives, all inspired by Stephen Bartlett's The Diary of a CEO. And it all kicks off with a really simple question. So I want you to think about this. You're in an elevator, you're in a hurry, so you start mashing that closed door button. And you know what? It actually makes you feel a little bit better, a little less anxious. But why? Well, the answer is surprisingly simple, and it's really the key to everything we're about to dive into. It's because that simple little action, it gives you the illusion of being in control. Now, here's the kicker. According to the National Elevator Industry, most of those closed-door buttons in modern elevators, they don't do anything. Seriously, they're placebos. They're designed for one reason and one reason only, to calm us down by giving us a feeling of control over our situation. And this brings us to our first big law, our deep, desperate need for certainty, for control. It's a huge and often totally irrational driver of how we act. And you know what? Smart businesses have known this for a very long time. Let's think about ordering a pizza. For years, pizza companies thought the big problem was slow delivery, so they hired more drivers, they offered money-back guarantees, but people kept complaining. They were totally missing the real issue. It wasn't just about speed. It was about the anxiety of not knowing. When is my pizza actually going to get here? So, what was the genius solution? Here's the crazy part. Domino's didn't necessarily make the pizzas come any faster. Nope. Instead, back in 2008, they gave us the pizza tracker. They gave us visibility, they gave us certainty, and by doing that, they handed the illusion of control right back to us. And guess what? Customer satisfaction went through the roof. So, this need for control is just one piece of the puzzle. Once you start to decode human nature, you start seeing why people do things that, on the surface, seem to make absolutely no sense at all. Picture this. It's the 1950s, and General Mills launches this revolutionary Betty Crocker cake mix. All you had to do was add water, bake it, and boom, a perfect cake. It was completely foolproof. And yet, it was a massive flop. Why on earth would a product that saved so much time and effort fail so badly? Well, psychologists dug in and they found this fascinating reason. The product was just too easy. It took away any sense of effort, any sense of ownership. The person baking it felt like a fraud, like they were cheating and couldn't really take credit for the delicious cake at the end. So what did they do? General Mills made one tiny, brilliant change. They took the powdered egg out of the mix and simply told customers to add one fresh egg themselves. That single act of contribution, that little bit of effort, was enough. All of a sudden, people felt invested, and sales absolutely skyrocketed. Our brains are also surprisingly easy to manipulate with a little bit of context. So, in one famous experiment, people were offered a choice between two all-inclusive holidays, one to Paris and one to Rome. In a straight-up choice, Paris was the more popular option. Simple enough, right? But then, the researchers threw in a little curveball. They added a third option, an all-inclusive trip to Rome, but without free coffee. And suddenly, the original all-inclusive Rome trip, the one with the coffee, became the most popular choice. It even beat Paris. How does that even work? Well, this is called the decoy effect. See, our brains hate making difficult comparisons, like Paris versus Rome. It's tough. But comparing Rome with coffee to Rome without coffee? That's a no-brainer. The decoy, Rome without coffee, makes the original Rome trip look like a fantastic deal, and it steers our decision without us even noticing. You see this everywhere, from the medium popcorn at the movies that seems like a bargain, to that pro subscription plan that looks amazing next to a slightly worse version. Okay, so we see how these outside forces can steer our big decisions. But what about the internal forces? The tiny, almost invisible actions we take every single day? Well, it turns out that when you apply these small shifts consistently, they can lead to absolutely massive results. In the world of aviation, there's a principle called the 1 in 60 rule, and it basically says that if a pilot is off course by just 1 single degree, for every 60 miles they fly, they will miss their target destination by 1 mile. Now, that doesn't really sound like much, does it? But just think about that for a second. 1 degree. Over a long journey, that tiny, seemingly insignificant deviation, it ends up leading you to a completely different city, a different country, or maybe even a different life. And the exact same thing is true for our habits, our careers, and our relationships.
This is exactly why we procrastinate on our big goals. That feeling of discomfort, it just feels like this huge 45-degree turn we have to make. But researchers say the only way to beat procrastination isn't with more willpower, it's by smallifying the task. Just break it down into a tiny 1-degree shift that you can make right now.
And this brings us to the final and honestly the most important law of all. All of these psychological tricks and principles, at the end of the day, they're just tools to help us manage the one resource we can never ever get back. Let's just look at the numbers plainly. Based on average life expectancy, if you're 30 years old, you've already used up almost 11,000 days. You've got about 17,000 left. If you're 40, you have fewer than 14,000 days left to go. I mean, seeing it laid out like this, it makes it feel pretty urgent, doesn't it? Steve Jobs understood this profound sense of urgency better than almost anyone. He said this in his famous commencement speech. The idea that our time is finite isn't supposed to be depressing. It's meant to be a clarifying force. It strips away all the unimportant stuff and helps us focus on what actually matters. So, I'll leave you with this one last thought. Knowing that every single day is a non-refundable deposit, and knowing that the smallest deviation can change your entire destination, what 1-degree change will you make today?